My name is Adam Driscoll, and today we're going to be talking about creating a web app with PowerShell Universal. Obviously, got to thank our sponsors, making sure that we get good food and can have the quality of conference that we have here. My name is Adam Driscoll. I am the founder of Ironman Software. I've been doing that for nearly 8 years now. I'm a former PowerShell MVP. I actually gave up that title last year after 10 years of being an MVP, decided to just kind of let someone else have the reins there and focus on some other stuff. I'm an author, blogger, YouTuber, and open source contributor around the PowerShell space. I'm a hobby collector, so I wanted to just talk a little bit about non-tech stuff. I'm a banjo player. I am really into mines for some reason. During COVID, I actually found a bunch of social distancing signs inside a mine in Idaho. I really like the weather for some reason, so I love this time of year because of all the severe weather down in the Tornado Alley. I'm a pinball wizard, number 3 in a little tiny barcade in Madison. And I used to be an off-roader until I did that, and my wife won't let you do that anymore. So, but what we're doing today is we're going to talk about how to kind of set up PowerShell Universal in Azure. We're going to build a web app around some Azure management. We're going to deploy a user, kind of create a little web app using PowerShell Universal in Azure. So we'll start with deploying PowerShell Universal to Azure as a Docker web app. Then we'll configure Entra ID app registration for OAuth for that web app. We'll install some graph modules inside PowerShell Universal. We will configure the OAuth authorization code grant flow inside PowerShell Universal, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is. But effectively, we'll have what we call an app inside PowerShell Universal to initiate that login. It'll go over to Entra, we'll do the login, and it'll call back into PowerShell Universal. Once we have that authorization code, we'll be able to build an app to create a user inside PowerShell Universal and add it to the PowerShell Universal portal. And then I'll also add a script to the portal to display the users after we create them. So if you've never played with PowerShell Universal before, it is a platform for building all kinds of stuff around PowerShell. It's kind of most well known for the UI parts, but it also has a lot of other stuff that we've added recently, like REST APIs. So creating REST APIs that call PowerShell scripts, so that you can kind of work with any system that can, talk HTTP can then call PowerShell. It also has a script execution engine, so, obviously kind of like Task Manager, you can do scheduling, and it has job history and parameters and output, and we'll see some of that today. And then the web UI parts. So if you ever used Universal Dashboard, we have that framework kind of integrated, as well as some other ways to create UIs with PowerShell. We are going to be working with the Microsoft Graph module just a little bit, so I'm going to be using the users module and the authentication module to connect to Graph to kind of work with users. I do want to talk a little bit about the Auth 2.0 authorization code grant flow, because sometimes using Graph, the hardest part about using Graph is connecting to Graph. So what we're going to be doing today is actually implementing this inside PowerShell Universal. And kind of the way it works is we redirect from to the identity provider from our web app. And that requires us to create a special URL that contains a bunch of information about where we're coming from, where we want to come back to, who we are, and what we're trying to do. So effectively, that URL will take us to the login page inside Entra ID, and it will allow the user to log in and then consent to the scope that we are requesting. So we're going to ask for the user read-write scope to be able to retrieve and update users inside Entra ID. Once they log in and consent, it's going to redirect back to PowerShell Universal, where we'll set up an API where we can extract the code and formulate another request to actually get the access token. So once we have the code, we'll formulate that request, send it back into Entra ID, and then it will validate the request we make, and if everything's all good, it will grant us an access code or token that we can then use with the Graph module. That will then be sent back to PowerShell Universal, which we can then store locally and then use for our future requests. So, real easy. So I am going to do pretty much all of this live, so hopefully Azure stays up. So the first thing we're going to do is, I'll make this a little bigger. It's the first thing I'm going to do if I can. Gaming. There we go. All right. We could do this with bicep. We could do this a million different ways, but I'm just going to do the portal to keep it easy. I'm going to click the create button on this web app. It's going to take me to kind of this web app setup. I am going to create a new resource group, and I'm just going to call it PS Summit 2. I have a backup in case this fails. And I'm going to call this PS Summit 2 for our web app. They added this new secure unique identifier. I am going to make a container app. It's going to be Linux. We're going to do this in Linux. And I'm not going to do Canada. I'm actually going to do West US. From there, I will create a new plan for my web app. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of a beefier VM since we're not going to be running it that long. So once I have that done, let's just step through this. I'm not going to create a database. PowerShell Universal does support SQL databases, but we can just run it all locally on the container. Once you get to the container section, I want to actually pull down a container for a Docker Hub. So if you select other registries, and then we can use our PowerShell Universal container. So I'll just do Ironman software / universal latest. So this will just get the latest version. And the way that Azure Web App containers work is if this latest version updates, it will automatically deploy. You can set it to automatically deploy to the latest version. Or you can pin to a version if you are running this in production and you want to ensure that you stay on the same version. You can do that. I am going to enable public access to this, and then I'm just going to review and create. I'm not going to turn on application insights or anything like that. So this will hopefully go really quickly, like it's always done. All right. So we're going to create this resource group with our web app, and it is now deploying that to Azure. So historically, this has taken about 30 seconds, so hopefully that maintains in the meantime. What we're going to look at here is we're going to log into the PowerShell Universal admin console. We're going to set up some basic details like the default username and password. And then once we're in there, we're going to retrieve some stuff from Azure so that we can begin to set up our authentication flow. So we've got our web plan set up here, and hopefully any second now, our website is now started. So it's actually starting a Docker container that contains PowerShell Universal, which is cross-platform, and that's how we can run it in there. It looks like there's a Windows option for containers up here that used to not exist, but it seems like now that is a thing. I'm sure it's like 10 times as expensive. All right, so the Docker container should be starting up. All right, so now we are running PowerShell Universal in Azure. This is the Docker container, and on our first run wizard, you can add your default admin password. We have some security settings, telemetry settings, all that fun stuff, but I'm just going to set the username and password. Click Finish. And as you can tell, it's warning because I didn't give it a very secure password. And I wish I could turn this off for this right now. We'll see. Okay. All right, so now we're in PowerShell Universal. Like I said, we have like APIs and scripts and apps. But what I'm going to do first is kind of set up the app registration for this so that then we can set some variables inside PowerShell Universal for our auth flow. So a couple things that we need to do. We got to go back to the portal, and I'm going to go to Entra ID. And what I'm looking for is app registration. And I'm going to create a new registration for PowerShell Universal. I'm just going to call it PS Summit 2. And we want to set a web platform because we're going to do that flow between the two web pages. And then I want this URL here minus the admin. So we're going to go like this, and we're going to change admin to auth. So what's going to happen is when we go to the login page, it's going to redirect back to this auth URL, which does not exist yet, but we will create it. So then I register that. And now I have this app registration where I can do authentication against to get tokens effectively. So there's a couple things I need to grab. I need to grab the client ID. So if we come back to PowerShell Universal, I'm going to go to variables. I'm going to create a new variable. We're going to call that client ID, and I'm going to set that to the client ID. So we've got that variable there. I need a client secret. So if we go to certificates and secrets, create a new client secret. I'll just call it what I've been calling everything else. Copy that value, and I'm going to put that in PowerShell Universal, but I'm going to create a secret instead of a standard variable so that it actually encrypts it and stores it in the database rather than putting it in a file somewhere. So we'll just call that client secret, and I'm going to put that value here. And yeah, it just stores it right in the database. And you can see now it doesn't like display that or anything. And when you access it in your scripts, you only it is only in memory when you're accessing the secret, and then you kind of use it, and then it's no longer in memory, unlike the other variables that are in PowerShell Universal. I need my web app URL, so I'm actually going to take this and create a variable of it. So it is possible to kind of retrieve some of this information, especially this, in PowerShell Universal via like HTTP headers and stuff like that. But since I have this one website, this is just the easiest thing to do, is just add the web app URL in here. And the reason we need this is because of some of the URLs we're going to formulate to do that auth flow. It needs to know how to get back to PowerShell Universal. So we're going to do that. And then finally, I need my tenant ID, so we know where to forward to log into. So I just have that URL here, just because it's easy. And let's create a variable for that. So tenant URL. So this is kind of like the standard Microsoft login. If you've ever configured something like SAML or OpenID Connect with Azure, this might be kind of a familiar URL. So I click that, and now we have all the variables we need to actually go ahead and set up the flow. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set up an app to initiate this login. So apps are kind of like, if you've ever played with Universal Dashboard, this is what Universal Dashboard was PowerShell scripts that create UIs in the web. So I'm going to create an onboarding app, and I'll show you a little example of what I mean by that. You set the onboarding, like the name and then the URL, and then that URL is then published by PowerShell Universal as like a web page. So if I go to view this app now, I actually have this onboarding app. It has hello world. It's very basic because I haven't really done anything to it yet. And you can kind of choose like how you want this to run. Like right now, this is running directly in the PowerShell Universal server, but this could also be running in an external process like PowerShell 7 or Windows PowerShell. And then you can call whatever you want inside the app definition. So if we actually go look at that, we just have this new UD app. So we have all these commandlets for defining different components inside PowerShell. And new UD app is kind of the outer container for that that app that we're looking at. And then that hello world came from that string that I put in there. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add a button to that. So we are going to grab this code. So you don't have to watch me type, but I will go through it. Actually, I should be able to format this. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to create a new button. So we have new UD button. And then we have what we call like an event handler or an endpoint, which is the on-click endpoint. And it just accepts a script block, which then is called when that button is clicked. So then from there, we just have like standard PowerShell script inside here, aside from this invoke UD redirect, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So a couple things that we're formulating here are for the authentication flow. The state is just kind of a value that you can pass in to the flow that will be returned back to you on the other side of the login process, so that you can kind of like, check to see, if this request matches that request kind of thing. I'm just doing a random number. Scopes are kind of what we want to access inside Graph. So what is important here is the user read write all scope. I'm pretty much asking to be able to get all users in my tenant and be able to write to them. So this allows me to not only update all the users and their profiles, but also create new users. Next, I want to get the URL that I'm going to redirect back to. So the web app URL is actually coming from that variable that I set earlier. And that's just the URL of PowerShell Universal. And I'm going to the auth endpoint. From there, I'm going to URL encode it because I have to pass this URL to Microsoft Entra ID so that it knows how to redirect back. But because I'm putting it in the query string, I have to make sure it's encoded. Otherwise, it won't know, or it'll be messed up. And then what I'm doing then is causing a redirect in the browser. So invoke UD redirect kind of goes down to the user's browser and causes a JavaScript redirect over to the login page. So I have that tenant URL that I entered earlier, which is the login.microsoft.com/mytenantid. And I'm going to the OAuth authorize endpoint. So this will cause that login page to appear. And then I'm passing in a couple things that I gathered from the Azure portal. So I have the client ID, and that client ID is another global variable that I set inside PowerShell Universal. The redirect URI is what I just formulated, so that's where it's going to redirect back to after authentication. The response mode is a query, so I want the code to come in the query string of the HTTP request. The scope is the scopes for the user read-write access. There's my random state, and then I want a consent prompt to pop up. If you don't include that, you might not see the consent prompt, and then you're going to get an error that the user didn't consent to this, and yeah, so this kind of gives them an interactive way to consent. And then I will open a new window. So when I save this, it's going to update this page, and now you can see instead of hello world, I have this authentication button. I put a little icon on it and everything, and if I click that, it's going to take me over to my login page. I'm going to select my account. This is the same account I used to log into the portal. And this is that consent form I was talking about. And depending on the scopes that you pass in, that's where you're going to see these types of things. So this read and write all users' full profiles, that was because I requested that user read-write scope. If you're an administrator, you can click this, and then that would make it so that any user in your organization no longer has to consent because your organization has consented for this app to get that privilege, but I will leave that blank. So once I accept this, you're gonna see this. So what's happened now is the authentication was actually successful, and it's redirected me back to PowerShell Universal. But as you can see, it redirected me to that auth URL that I was talking about. And that auth URL does not exist. We haven't created that yet. And because in the original request I said response type query, that's why the code is in the query string. So you see this like big code. And this is what we're going to use to actually retrieve our access token. So now what we need to do is actually implement that auth endpoint. So if we come back to PowerShell Universal, go up to the API section, this is where you define endpoints. So endpoints, like I said, are just HTTP endpoints that call PowerShell scripts, and I'm going to create a new auth endpoint. I'm going to leave everything kind of just default, but you can do things like post endpoints and delete endpoints. I'm just doing a get. There's like security settings and everything, but I'm just gonna leave this as is. And then what that looks like is now I have this auth endpoint, and if I go to that auth endpoint, it's gonna give me a blank page pretty much. But if we go into this little edit code button, you can see similar to the app, I can just add PowerShell script here that gets invoked when this endpoint is called. So I am going to grab that, which I have already written, because it took me a long time to actually get this right. And okay, so now what this is going to do is do that other half of the authorization kind of diagram that I did. We're going to receive this request, which is going to have that code query string parameter with that long string. And we're going to take that and make the request to the tenant URL token endpoint for OAuth. And once we make this request, this will actually grant the access token on behalf of the user that's logging in. So the couple things that we need to pass in with this request are the client ID, same client ID we used before, the code, and the reason I don't have to do anything to extract that code is PowerShell Universal will automatically look at the query string and it'll create a variable populated with that value. So this is the code that Entra ID is actually sending back to the URL. From there, I'm going to use the same scope of the user read write all and the grant type of authorization code. And this is where I need to pass in my client secret. So this is that client secret I generated in Entra ID, and I'm actually using what's called the secret scope. So we have a special scope inside PowerShell Universal to retrieve secrets kind of on the fly. So variables like client ID, because they're not secret, are created in the run space when it's started. But we don't want secrets to live in memory that long. So when you call the secret client secret, it's going to go out and retrieve that secret from wherever you have it stored, whether it be the database or Azure Key Vault or something like that. So after we make this request, it's going to return a result. And in that result, it's going to have some information. It's going to have the number of seconds that this token is good for, which we'll set into an expiration date time. And then it's going to have an access token. And the access token is what we're actually after. So after all that, we'll have our access token, which we can then pass to the graph commandlets. So set PSU cache then is used to store that in memory. So obviously this is not the most secure implementation because I'm just using the current user's username to store the access token in memory. But once I have access to that, I can use it throughout the platform to use mggraph as that user. And then I'm just setting an expiration time. So when that token expires, the cached item also expires. And then we'll have to go through the flow again. So we'll just save this. And I'm going to go back to my app. And we'll just go through that flow one more time. So now if I click authenticate, it opens up the new window. We have to sign in again. We have to consent again. And then it takes me back. And now it says I'm authenticated. And you can see I can close this window. So in the background there, I went through that request back to Azure, and then now we have the access token stored. So now that we have that, we should be able to use it. So I am going to grab, well, first of all, I'm going to install a couple modules so that we can at least do something. If you go to the modules and go to gallery, the search box is really small right now. But I want to do Microsoft, oops, graph, authentication. So this is just going up to the PS gallery. It's going to install that. And then I want to install user. And we'll install users. So those two modules are now being installed. They should be done in a sec there. And we're actually going to create a script now to actually do something. Well, let me see. I think I actually have one more step before that. Yes, I'm going to do this first. Okay. We're going to make it a little more interactive on the app before we create the script. So I'm going to go back to this app and do this. And let's just kind of step through what's happening here. So I've added a little more app code in here to make it a little more interactive. The first thing that you'll see here is a new UD dynamic. And dynamic sections allow you to kind of refresh things on the fly or load things asynchronously so that your whole page isn't loading for some waiting for some PowerShell command to complete. You have this dynamic section that you can reload dynamically or run things in the background. So I'm going to call get PSU cache. I'm getting that username again, which will give me back the access token. So if I have an access token, then we're going to fall into the else block. If I don't, we'll show that authentication button again. And then if I do have a token, then we'll just show this new UD alert that we're authenticated instead of that, that button to authenticate. So now, this is not checking at all for a refresh. Well, okay, so when I authenticate, it's checking 1 second here. So I'll show you that here now, actually. So as you can see here, the dynamic is loaded, so it's not checking that refresh anymore. It is done, but if we were doing something like this, where we have a while loop where I'm checking every second, that would be running in the dynamic in the background. And I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to clear my token out. So I do remove PSU cache key admin. So now I no longer have an app token. If I refresh this page, you'll see that the authenticate button is back because I lost my app token. So if we go through the flow, and then we accept, if we were actually to look over there, you can see that's checking, but every second. And right before it said this, it was actually running in the background, checking every second to see if the code was there. Once the code got in, it refreshed that dynamic section, and now we're authenticated again. And if I were to reload this page, you'll see it's just authenticated because it's just checking that code. So that's cool. We're authenticated, but it's not really doing anything. Got the hard part done, I guess. But what I'm going to do now is actually create a couple scripts to do some stuff. So I had ChatGTP generate me a password generator. So we're going to do new OB password. So I'm just creating scripts in PowerShell Universal. It's just PS1 files. Just change this to list view because it's all squished. And all this is going to do is generate a random password, list of characters, join 12 of the random ones together to return a password. So I'll save that. And then now I'm going to create a script that is actually going to go out and create the user. So we'll new OB user. And we'll say OK. And now this is my really cool script. All right. So what this script is doing is it has 3 parameters. Username, mail nickname, and display name. And those are values that I'm going to pass to new MG graph. The first thing that I'm going to do is actually get PSU cache. So you get a lot of information about the job that is running in the current job. So if you use this UA job variable, you have like this job object that then has an identity of the user that's running the script. So that's how I can look up the current user's access code. From there, I'm going to call connect mggraph. I'm going to pass in that access token as a secure string and hide the welcome message. So that's just going to log into graph for me for this session. And then I'm going to set up the user. So I'm going to get the password profile. So when you pass in this hash table, it sets up all kinds of information about the password. In this case, it's setting just the password, but you can do like password expiration and that kind of thing. And then I'm going to call my new OB password.ps1. So that's just in the same folder as this script, so that's why I'm just effectively calling it there. And then I'm calling new MG user displaying, or adding the display name, the password profile. I'm enabling the count. I'm setting the mail nickname, and I'm setting the username as the user principal name. Once complete, it's going to return a PS custom object back to the pipeline with information about this user. So we'll save this. So the script is saved. So one thing you could do in PowerShell Universal is just run this script, and it's actually going to look at the param block and provide you this little form. So it's like, those are the parameters of this script here. If you want to run the script here, you could do this, but then you would have to give access to the admin console, and like it's kind of overwhelming for some users to like come in here and try to find the right script or like lock down the admin console in a way to disallow users from accessing other things in PowerShell Universal. So what we're going to do is actually update that app to have a form to call this script. So I am going to go back to my app, and we're going to, oh, I restarted my app. All right. And we are going to add a form. Instead of where it said authenticated, I'm going to add a form to the app. So I have that code here, which I will step through in 1 sec. All right, I should be able to format this. Okay, so what's happening here now, instead of that authenticated like alert, it's gonna have this form. So a new UD card is just a square white box that you can put around stuff. It's like a visual thing. And then the form consists of 2 main components that are required. One being the children components. So in this case, I have some text boxes for each one of the items in that script. And then the other aspect of this is to what happens when that form is submitted. So in this case, I'm going to invoke a script. I mean, you could do whatever you want here. You know, you could technically call that new mggraph user command here. One reason to isolate it in a script is that the PowerShell apps like this all run in a single process. So a lot of PowerShell modules expect things to be happening as a single user and that kind of thing. But with an app, you could have multiple people using that app, and then you're going to stomp on each other's access tokens, and all of a sudden you're going to be running things as different users and stuff like that. So what we want to actually do is run it in a different process in using invoke PSU script. So invoke PSU script, we'll find that script inside PowerShell Universal, run it through the PowerShell Universal like job engine, the same thing that does like the scheduling. And if you click the run script button, this is the same thing that would happen. We're going to pass in some parameters from the form, and we have a special variable called event data that effectively contains the form data. So this is just an object with what the user has entered in the form. We're going to wait for the output of that script, which is going to be our MG user, and that is that PS custom object I made that contains the temp password and the user's username. If that was successful, we're going to show a little pop-up, and then we're going to display that information to the user. So we're going to save this, and if we come back here, now you can see I have a form. Because I'm authenticated, I didn't get that authenticate button, but I have this new user form that can then go out and call my script. So what I'm going to do is create a new user, ironmansoftware.microsoft.com. Hopefully this doesn't exist. All right, and then I'm going to click this create user button. In the background, it started running that stuff. It popped that little pop-up out, and now it went and ran my script, and it automatically created that user in graph. So here's my username and my temporary password that was generated, and in graph we have PSU333. So what's kind of cool about running it through the job engine is that we have like an audit history of who did that, because we can go back to the automation page here and click jobs, and you'll see that we have that job that just ran. So because we ran new OB user through invoke PSU script, we have history of that. So you can see that the admin ran this manually in the integrated environment, on this machine. And if we actually look at the job, you can see things like this was a user that was created. There's a temp password. There's a pipeline output, which you could use in another script. And this is also what's passed back to the whatever called the invoke PSU script. You get this pipeline output back as an object, so then I can work with it. And then you can also see what parameters they actually passed in to the script to run this. So yeah, so that's kind of like a good way to kind of add this audit log and history, and then see what's running in your environment, especially if things aren't succeeding. All right, so I kind of want to prove that this ran. So I do want to do one more thing where I want to create a script that retrieves users, and I'm going to kind of show you one other way to kind of create a UI without having to write all that app code. App code can get kind of complicated, and as you can see, you got to know special commandlets and that kind of thing. But the other way that you can make simple UI in PowerShell Universal is using the portal. So I am going to create one more script, and not an app. I'm going to create one more script to get the users back, to prove that I created that user in graph. So I just have a very, very simple script here. We're just going to call it get OB user. Click OK. And here. All right, so very similar to the structure of the previous command, I'm going to use get PSU cache to look up the user's app token or access token. Connect to graph using that access token, and then I'm going to call get mg user -all to return all users in my tenant. I'm going to filter that by, I'm sure I can filter an mg graph, but I'm going to filter that with where object for PSU. And then I'm going to select the display name and user principal name from those objects so I don't get the whole object back. So if I save this, I'm going to update the script properties here, and you'll see that there's this portal section. we've really got to translate that. And I'm going to add my administrator group to the portal, and I'm going to add table output for this script. So now, if I were to go to portal and view the portal, you have this like super basic layout that includes different things that you can assign in PowerShell Universal to the user. So if you didn't want someone to have access to the admin console, you could provide them with this, and then you just assign the script to them. This works for both scripts that have parameters and scripts like this where they don't. And you can assign apps and that kind of thing. They'll show up here, which I actually could do, because if you click apps, and I were to actually assign this to my administrator role, you would also see that inside the portal as well. So I have the onboarding app as well. So I could go and go create users using that, and then I could use get OB user to view users. So if I click open on this, it's going to take me over to this page. This doesn't take any parameters, so it's going to go ahead and run that script. So in the background, it went and used the job scheduler to call get OB user. It connected to Graph as my account. And then from there, I was able to call get MG user and then see all the user accounts that contain PSU in my environment. Yeah, so that is, I think, oh, I was going to add this. Okay, so this, I wanted to show another example of how you could do that in an app. And I think the one problem is that we're going to code on the fly. That's what we're going to do. It's going to not work. So the other thing you could do is add this to the app itself. Instead of adding that to the portal and making the user go to the portal in two different places for that, you can also add additional components. So for example, I'm going to do get PSU OB user. I don't need this stuff. So what this is going to do is go call get OB user, wait for the output from that command line. Because we store the pipeline output, you'll get that back in this user's object, and then you can call new UD table to actually display that data in the app itself. I've done a little work here to make it so that we don't wait for this to load while the page is loading, and that's where I have this new UD dynamic and loading component where it's going to show a little loading users thing on the page, which I think is not formatted really well. So you can see it's loading users on the bottom. It's going out and calling that script, and now I have a table of the users underneath the form. And because this is all interactive, if I wanted to kind of hook those together, when I create a new user, I could actually go ahead and refresh that table after the user has been created. All right, so I think that kind of does it for my demo. All of the code that I just went through right here, I am going to put up on this repository. I'll make that a little bit bigger. I have like a go. Did it go? I broke something. Well, it's frozen. So it's up in my presentations repo. It's on GitHub, but that's a link to the repository. And yeah, if there are any questions.
First of all, I want to say great presentation. It's obviously you know your software very well. You did that all on the fly, and it's very smooth. Excellent demo. I was curious, so you did the authentication piece, it's a kind of a manual coded authentication piece. Is there Azure authentication built into PowerShell Universal?
Yeah, so I wanted to show a presentation where you didn't have to buy a license, right? So yeah, but there is Azure authentication built in, so yeah. But yeah.
Going that same route, could you have done a registered application that had application permissions rather than delegated permissions for this?
Yeah.
Not obviously for an onboarding, but maybe for something that was read-only?
Yes, yep, exactly, yep. Yeah, because you can do, the other thing you can do is like manage identities and stuff like that where PowerShell will just pick up the managed identity, so it's like, especially when you're in Azure, so yeah.
Is it possible to do like front-end kind of data validation on the form data before it actually gets submitted to the underlying script?
Yeah, so one of the other events, so you saw the on-submit event, but there's also an on-validate event. So like as the user's like typing and they click off the text box, you can run whatever you want to like validate, whether that be like actually reach out to something or just like do like basic validation, like the password is not long enough or like, you know, that kind of thing. So, yeah. That one. All right, cool. Well, yeah, thank you very much for being here. And if you have any questions after this session, just find me. I'm always happy to show demos or answer any questions. So.